When I first moved into the building on Broadview Street, I thought I'd finally found a place that felt like home. It wasn't much. A cramped one-bedroom with peeling paint, paper-thin walls, and a lingering smell of cigarette smoke from decades past. But it was mine. And after a breakup that had hollowed me out, I needed something that was mine. The neighborhood was decent. The rent was low, and the building manager, Mrs. Alcott, was a sweet old lady who offered me oatmeal cookies the day I signed the lease. It was everything I thought I needed. But from the very first night, something about apartment 3B felt off. My place, 3A, shared a thin wall with it. I didn't know who lived there. I hadn't seen anyone going in or out. No nameplate on the door, no sound of a TV or music, not even footsteps, just silence. But sometimes when I was brushing my teeth or scrolling on my phone late at night, I felt it. A strange awareness coming from that wall. Like someone was standing right on the other side, listening, watching. The first time I noticed it was about a week after I moved in. I was lying in bed around midnight trying to fall asleep when I heard it. A soft click from the shared wall. Then another. Not a random building noise, deliberate, rhythmic. I pressed my ear against the plaster, holding my breath. Click, pause, click, click, pause, click. It was too precise to be pipes or settling wood. It sounded like tapping, like someone was sending a signal. I told myself I was being paranoid. Old buildings make weird sounds. Maybe it was just the heating system. But the next night, the tapping came again. Same time, same pattern. And then a low scraping noise like fingernails dragging slowly across drywall. I should have ignored it. I should have put in earplugs and gone to sleep. But I didn't. I grabbed a chair, climbed up, and pressed my eye to the small ventilation grate near the top of the wall. And that's when I saw it. A tiny hole. Not part of the vent, not part of the wall. A hole that had been drilled there, fresh, perfectly circular. And behind it, movement, slow, deliberate. Someone was looking back at me. I jumped back so hard the chair toppled. My heart hammered as I stared at the wall, trying to process what I'd just seen. There was no reason for a hole to be there. No reason for anyone to be behind it. But I knew what I saw. The faintest glint of an eye catching the light. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning I marched straight to Mrs. Alcott's office. "Hey, do you know who's in 3B? I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. She blinked. 3B? Oh, no one. It's been empty for a couple of months. Maintenance is supposed to repaint before we list it again. I stared at her. Are you sure? I heard noises last night like tapping, scraping. She gave me a puzzled smile. Old buildings make funny sounds. Pipes, wood. You'll get used to it. But I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was lying to me. The noises continued. Every night at almost exactly 12:17 a.m. Tapping, scraping, the occasional faint thud against the wall. Once I heard what sounded like breathing. I covered the vent with duct tape, but the next day it was peeled back. I pushed my dresser against the wall. The following night, the tapping shifted slightly, coming from a different spot, closer to the floor, nearer to where I slept. And then the notes started. It was a Tuesday. I came home from work, unlocked my door, and froze. A small piece of folded paper was sitting just inside the entryway. Someone had slid it under my door. I picked it up with shaking hands and unfolded it. I like when you read before bed. No name, no signature, just that one sentence written in neat, precise handwriting. I stared at the page until the words blurred. There was no way anyone could know that. I never read near the window. I always read in bed by the wall I shared with 3B. I called the police that night. The responding officer was polite but not particularly interested. Could be a prank, he said. Neighbor messing with you. Do you have a peephole camera? No, I mean it's supposed to be empty next door, I said. The manager told me. Empty apartments get squatters all the time, he interrupted. We'll do a welfare check. They knocked on the door to 3B, no answer. They used a master key to enter. The apartment was empty. Nothing here, the officer said, shining a flashlight into the bare living room. No signs of forced entry, but I knew he was wrong. There was something. I could feel it. The notes kept coming. Once a week, always slipped under the door while I was at work. Blue suits you. I know you cry when you think no one's watching. I almost knocked last night. I stopped sleeping. I started checking my closet every night. I put tape on the door to see if anyone opened it while I was gone. I even installed a cheap security camera pointing at the hallway. Nothing. Every time I checked, there was no one there. Then about 6 weeks after the first note, I found something worse. I woke up around 3 a.m. to a faint clicking sound. Not from the wall this time, but from inside my room. The closet door was slightly ajar. I froze. I hadn't opened it. I reached for my phone, using the flashlight to illuminate the darkness. And there, in the thin strip of light beneath the closet door, I saw it. A pair of bare toes. Someone was standing inside. I screamed, bolted for the door, and ran into the hallway barefoot. My neighbors came out. The police came again. The closet was empty. No footprints. No signs of forced entry. Maybe you were dreaming, the officer said gently. But I knew what I saw. I moved my bed into the living room that night. I couldn't bear to sleep near that wall. I started locking my bedroom door from the outside. I called my sister and told her I was thinking of breaking the lease. Then 2 days later, the building handyman knocked on my door. "Hey," he said, scratching the back of his neck. "We're doing a check on the crawlspace access points. There's one in your closet. Mind if I take a look?" I let him in. He climbed up into the square panel in the closet ceiling, poking around with a flashlight. And then I heard him curse softly. "What is it?" I asked. He didn't answer at first. When he climbed down, his face was pale. He held something in his hand, a small plastic camera. "Found this taped up there?" he muttered. "Looks like it was pointed down into your closet." They found more the next day. 3 cameras total, one above the closet, one behind a vent grate, one drilled directly into the wall above where my bed used to be. Each had a small transmitter attached, the kind that could stream video to a nearby device. The police opened a full investigation. They questioned Mrs. Alcott. They dusted for prints. They even checked the crawlspace connecting 3A and 3B. That's when they discovered the panel inside 3B's closet was loose. Behind it was a narrow tunnel, a maintenance space that ran between the walls of several apartments. And in that space, they found evidence someone had been living there. Blankets, food wrappers, a flashlight, and dozens of small holes drilled through the drywall, all pointing into my apartment. But they never found the man. I moved out within a week. Broke the lease, paid the penalty, didn't care. I packed my life into 2 suitcases and stayed with my sister for a while. But the thing that haunts me isn't the cameras, or the notes, or even the thought of him standing in my closet at 3 a.m. It's this. A few days before I left, I came home to grab the last of my boxes. As I turned the key in the lock, I noticed a folded piece of paper wedged into the doorframe. No one else had a key. The police had already swept the place. But someone had left it there anyway. One last note: walls are thin, doors open. You'll see me again. I don't know where he is. I don't know if they'll ever catch him. But every time I move into a new apartment now, the first thing I do is press my ear to the wall. And I listen. Because somewhere, just inches away, someone might be doing the same.
I used to laugh at people who said they felt like they were being watched.
I'd roll my eyes whenever a friend told me they'd had that paranoid sensation of eyes on the back of their neck, or that they'd seen something move in their peripheral vision, only to find nothing there. I thought it was just anxiety, brains playing tricks. That was before I moved into apartment 3B. Now I don't laugh anymore. It all started when I got the job downtown, a decent promotion, good salary, and finally enough to get my own place without roommates. The building I found wasn't anything special. A 1960s brick complex squeezed between a dry cleaner and a vape shop. 5 floors tall with cracked tile floors and an elevator that clanked like it was sighing under the weight of its own age. But it was cheap, and more importantly, it was mine. The first few weeks were uneventful. I worked, came home, watched TV, slept. But sometime around the 3rd week, I started noticing things. It was little at first. I'd come home to find my blinds drawn even though I always left them open. A mug I'd left in the sink would be in the drying rack. Once I found my bathroom door closed when I was certain I'd left it open. I chalked it up to forgetfulness. Moving stress. Nothing worth worrying about. But then came the nights. The first one started around 2:17 a.m. I remember the time because I rolled over to check the clock when I heard it. A soft, deliberate click from somewhere in the apartment, like the sound of a light switch or a door latch. I froze. My heart rate spiked and every nerve in my body went rigid. I told myself it was the building settling, or a neighbor. But then there was another sound. Footsteps. Slow. Careful. Inside my apartment, I stayed perfectly still, barely breathing. The steps moved from the kitchen to the living room. Then silence. I waited there in the dark for nearly 20 minutes, listening. Nothing. When I finally mustered the courage to get up, I grabbed a kitchen knife and turned on every light in the apartment. It was empty. Every door locked. Every window sealed. Nothing was out of place. I barely slept that night. Over the next week, the sounds kept coming. Always around 2 or 3 a.m. Sometimes it was footsteps. Sometimes a faint tapping. Once, I swore I heard someone breathing just outside my bedroom door. I even called the police one night. They came, searched the apartment, and found nothing. They told me I was probably hearing noises from the units next door. Thin walls. Old building. But I knew the sounds were coming from inside. I started installing cameras, cheap motion sensor ones I bought online. I placed one in the living room, one in the hallway, and one pointed at my front door. For 3 nights, nothing. Then on the 4th, I woke to the sound of something falling in the kitchen. The next morning, I checked the footage. Nothing. The camera in the living room showed an empty room the entire night. But the strange thing was the timestamp. Between 2:13 and 2:45 a.m., the exact time the noise had happened, the footage was missing. Corrupted, like someone had deleted it. My stomach dropped. By now I was on edge all the time. I started triple-checking my locks. I wedged a chair under the doorknob at night. I even left little strips of tape on the closet doors and cabinets to see if they'd been disturbed. And they were. Tiny things kept changing. A cereal box turned backwards. My shampoo bottle moved an inch to the left. A pair of socks I swore I'd left in the laundry basket suddenly folded neatly on the bed. Someone was in my apartment, I told the landlord. He said I was imagining things. I asked about spare keys. He said only I had one. I called the police again. They said without evidence of a break-in, there was nothing they could do. So I started staying awake at night. The first night I tried, I made it until 3:04 a.m. before nodding off. When I woke up, the blinds were closed again. The second night, I set an alarm to wake me every hour. At 2:22 a.m., I thought I heard the softest scrape against the hallway wall, like fingertips dragging across plaster. I crept out of bed, knife in hand, every muscle trembling. The apartment was silent, empty, and then I saw it. Just above the baseboard in the hallway. Behind where my bookshelf normally stood was a tiny circular hole in the drywall, no bigger than a nickel. I'd never noticed it before, and I would have sworn it hadn't been there when I moved in. I knelt and peered inside. It was pitch black. But then just for a second I thought I saw movement, a faint shifting like someone pulling back into the darkness. I staggered back, my skin crawling. The next day I pushed the bookshelf aside and examined the wall. The hole wasn't drilled from my side. It had been punched through from the inside. Like someone had made it looking out. I called the landlord again. This time I didn't ask. I demanded he send maintenance. He sighed and said he'd have someone by the end of the week. They never came. A few nights later, I woke to a new sound, whispering. It was faint, so faint I thought I was dreaming at first. But when I held my breath, I could hear it. Words I couldn't quite make out murmured through the walls. I pressed my ear to the drywall near the hole. Silence, then a slow, deliberate tap. Once, twice, 3 times. I stumbled back and spent the rest of the night in my car. At this point, I was barely functioning. I started staying at work late. I dreaded coming home. I slept with the lights on, the knife on my nightstand. I considered breaking my lease, but the landlord refused, said I'd lose my deposit and be on the hook for the remainder of the contract. Then, one night everything escalated. It was raining hard, sheets of water hammering against the windows. I was half asleep on the couch, a movie playing low in the background, when I heard the unmistakable sound of something moving inside the walls. It wasn't footsteps this time. It was crawling. Slow, deliberate shuffling. I held my breath and listened. The sound was moving from the kitchen toward the bedroom. Then it stopped. For almost a full minute, there was silence. Then tap, 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 and 3 knocks against the wall, right next to where my head was resting. I bolted upright. The knocks came again, this time inside the wall behind the couch. Then from the hallway. Then from the bathroom, it was like someone was following me through the walls. I don't remember unlocking the door. I just remember running into the hallway in my socks, dialing 911 with shaking hands. The police came again. They searched everything. No one was there. They said maybe a raccoon had gotten in somehow. Maybe pipes expanding. They didn't believe a word I said, but I know what I heard. And I know it wasn't an animal. 2 days later, I noticed something new. The tiny hole in the hallway wall was gone. Someone had patched it from the inside, and in its place on the other side of the hallway, near my front door, was a new one. Just a little higher, just at eye level. That night, I taped a piece of cardboard over it. The next morning, the cardboard was gone. I'm writing this now from a motel 5 miles from the apartment. I haven't been back since that night. My lease is technically still active, but I don't care. I packed a duffel bag and left everything else behind. But even now, days later I can't sleep, because last night, in this motel room I woke up at 2:17 a.m., the exact time the noises always started. And I swear I heard it again. A faint, deliberate tap against the wall by the bed. 3 knocks just like before. I don't know who nor what it was in my apartment. I don't know how they got in or how long they were there. I don't know if they're still watching me. But sometimes when I'm lying awake in the dark, I get that old familiar feeling again. The one I used to laugh at. The feeling that someone is watching me. From inside the walls. I'd been searching for an apartment for months when I found the listing for 214 West Mason Street. The photos were nothing special. An old brick building with narrow windows and scuffed hardwood floors. But it was affordable and close to my new job. The landlord, a tall, distracted man named Harris, barely looked up from his clipboard during the viewing. "It's an old place," he said, jingling a set of keys. "Some quirks. But solid bones. You'll like it here." I signed the lease that afternoon. The first few days were what you'd expect. Unpacking boxes, figuring out where to put furniture, learning which floorboards creaked. Apartment 4C wasn't big, but it was cozy. A living room with a faded bay window, a kitchen tucked into a corner, and a single bedroom with a closet that smelled faintly of cedar. It felt right, but from the beginning, there was one thing I couldn't shake. The layout didn't make sense. The apartment shared a wall with 4B, the one next door, and I could hear faint sounds through it sometimes. A TV, a hairdryer, muffled footsteps. But the wall on the other side, the one between the living room and the hallway, was silent. Too thick. And when I walked along it, tapping the plaster lightly with my knuckles, the echo was strange hollow. I told myself it was nothing. Old building quirks. But over the next week, I started noticing more. The space between the bedroom closet and the wall behind it felt off. Deeper than it should have been. When I pressed my ear against it, I swore I could hear a faint hum like distant electrical buzzing. And there was a draft in that corner of the room, cold and constant, even with the windows shut tight. By the second week, curiosity had turned into obsession. I drew a floor plan of the unit based on measurements, and that's when I realized something chilling. There was an extra 8 feet of space unaccounted for behind the bedroom wall. I tried asking the landlord. "It's just support structure," he said over the phone. "Pipes, insulation, that sort of thing. Don't go poking around." But the way he said it, too quickly, too firmly, made my stomach tighten. I started poking around anyway. First, I emptied the closet. The back panel was plywood nailed into studs, newer than the rest of the room. I tapped it hollow. I slipped a flathead screwdriver into the seam and pried gently. 1 nail popped out. Then another. The panel shifted slightly, revealing a narrow gap in about 2 inches, and a wave of cold, musty air rushed out. I stared into the darkness beyond the gap for a long time. Then I sealed the closet, shoved the panel back into place, and told myself to forget about it. But I couldn't. A few nights later, I woke up at 3:11 a.m. to a sound. Thud, then silence. Thud. It was slow, rhythmic, coming from behind the closet wall, like something shifting its weight, moving. I froze. The sound stopped as soon as I sat up. I waited in the dark for nearly 10 minutes before crawling out of bed and pressing my ear against the panel. Silence. Then, scrape. A slow drag like wood against wood, then nothing. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next morning, I asked my neighbor in 4B if they'd heard anything strange. She looked at me blankly. "No. But that wall isn't shared," she said. There's no apartment behind yours. That's the end of the building. That's when the bottom dropped out of my stomach. If 4C was the last unit on the floor, what was behind that wall? 2 nights later, I decided I had to know. I waited until 2 a.m. when the building was silent. I grabbed a flashlight and a small pry bar and returned to the closet. The plywood panel was stubborn, but eventually I worked it loose enough to pull it free. Behind it was a dark void, heavy with the smell of old dust and something else. Something sour and metallic like rust. The opening was just wide enough to slip through. I hesitated for almost 5 full minutes, my heart hammering in my chest, before finally ducking inside. The space was narrower than I expected, maybe 4 feet across, 10 feet long and pitch black except for the weak beam of my flashlight. The floor was unfinished concrete, littered with old insulation and splintered wood. Cobwebs clung to the corners. But the strangest thing was the door. It was at the far end of the hidden space, half buried behind a layer of drywall someone had hastily tacked over it. The drywall had been painted the same faded beige as my bedroom, like someone wanted it to disappear. I stepped closer and felt the temperature drop. The metal knob was icy cold under my hand. I didn't open it. I couldn't. My body simply refused. I stumbled back through the opening and spent the rest of the night sitting on the couch, staring at the closet door. The next day, I called the landlord again. "Listen," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "There's a space behind my wall. And a door." "What's back there?" Silence. "Then you're not supposed to go in there," he said flatly. "Seal it back up." "Leave it alone." "Why?" "What is it?" "Just leave it alone," he repeated. And then he hung up. I didn't seal it. I couldn't. Over the next several days, I kept thinking about the door, dreaming about it. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured it, cold, silent, waiting. By the 4th night, I couldn't stand it anymore. I pulled the panel off again and crawled into the hollow space. This time, I brought tools. The drywall wasn't hard to break through. A few hits with a hammer and it crumbled away, revealing the full door. Heavy steel, no visible keyhole, just a small indentation where a handle used to be. It looked old, industrial, wrong, and then I noticed something etched into the metal just above where the knob had been. 4C, access restricted. My breath caught. Why would a door inside my wall be marked like that? I leaned close, pressing my ear against the cold metal. Tap, tap, tap. I jerked back so hard I hit my head on the ceiling. My flashlight slipped from my hand and clattered to the floor, plunging the space into darkness. And then I heard it. A low, wet breathing just on the other side of the door. I scrambled out of there as fast as I could, sealing the closet and shoving a dresser in front of it. That night I slept in the living room with every light on. I told myself I'd call someone. The city, the building inspector, anyone. But I never did. Some part of me was terrified that if I told someone it would become real. But the sounds didn't stop. They started coming earlier. 1:48 a.m., 1:22, 12:57. Sometimes it was tapping, sometimes whispering. Once I heard what sounded like nails scratching down the metal, and sometimes I'd wake up and find the closet door slightly open. Even though I'd shoved furniture in front of it, I nailed it shut after that. Hammered 3-inch steel nails through the frame. The next night, they were all pulled out. Neatly placed on the floor. I stopped sleeping in the bedroom entirely. I spent nights on the couch, headphones in, pretending none of it was happening. But I could still hear it. Faint rhythmic sounds through the wall like someone pacing in a room that shouldn't exist. Then came the night that made me leave. It was just past 2 a.m. when I woke to a click. At first I thought it was the radiator. Then I heard it again. Click, click. Coming from the bedroom. I turned on the light and crept toward the hallway. The air felt heavier than usual. Damp, cold, hard to breathe. My heart was racing as I reached for the doorknob. The door was unlocked. I never left it unlocked. I pushed it open a few inches and froze. The closet door was wide open. The dresser I'd shoved in front of it was pushed aside, lying halfway across the floor. And in the center of the bedroom carpet, directly beneath the vent, was a pile of dust and insulation, like someone had crawled through the wall and dragged themselves into the room. I backed away, heart slamming against my ribs, and ran. I didn't grab clothes. I didn't pack a bag. I just left. Down the stairs, out into the freezing night, barefoot and shaking. I never went back. It's been 5 weeks now. I'm staying with a friend across town and I haven't stepped foot in 4C since that night. I tried calling the landlord again, but the number's disconnected. When I stopped by the building a few days ago, someone else was already moving in. They'd sealed the closet, painted the walls. It looked almost normal. Almost I wanted to warn them. I really did. But when I saw the new tenant smiling, holding a box of dishes and laughing with her friend, the words caught in my throat, because I knew she wouldn't believe me. No one ever does. But sometimes late at night, when the city is quiet and I'm alone in the dark, I swear I can still hear it. Tap, 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 like something calling to me. From behind the wall,